Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hix, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grand-nephew of John Hix, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. In a recent episode on blimps and the Golden Age of airships in the 1930s, I was looking at one of the comic strips on the Graf Zeppelin, and I noticed a story nearby about Louis Yansky, a weightlifter, and it reminded me of the stack of folders that we had in the archives that I had looked at for years and years on weightlifters. Now, what sets Strange As It Seems apart from Ripley's Believe It or Not, the two were huge competitors back in the day, was that John Hix insisted that every fact he published be true and proven. In fact, if you wrote Ripley and said, hey, that doesn't really sound like that happened, Ripley would always send you back a postcard that said, believe it or not. Whereas John Hix put at the bottom of every one of his comic strips the words, if you doubt this, write for proof to the author. Now, while the comic strips, radio shows, film shorts were all amazing and entertaining in and of themselves, it was this treasure trove of folders full of letters, affidavits, photographs that proved the facts that for me as a kid growing up, this was the real treasure. Kind of quaint when you think about it in this day and age, isn't it? When we can have 50 cameras rolling and dozens of reporters in the White House interviewing the president, and nobody still can agree on what's true. With all of the amazing stories in here, this will most likely take us 2 episodes. But let's dive in to the wild world of weightlifting in the 1930s. Buckle up. So for the first story, I thought I'd figure out who this Louis Yansky was and what his story was. And I found in here a handwritten letter from Louis Yansky saying, if you cannot use this in your Strange As It Seems, please return. Thank you. Stamped, enveloped, and closed. And what we have here is a little booklet called Louis Yansky, Strength Specialties. And in the introductory, we have Louis R. Yansky has entered the field of strong men, and I claim he is without an equal. Of course, this is by E.J. Yansky. Manager looks to be Louis's dad. But in here we have recommendations from Mr. Sam Young at the new casino, who says Mr. Louis Yansky appeared at the casino in feats of strength and pleased the audience. He is possessed of unusual strength for his weight. And here we have from the Clinton, Indiana Republican from September 14th, 1900. No other man ever put up more than his own weight with one hand. And last but not least, a recommendation by the Terre Haute Street Fair and Carnival Association, proving, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Louis R. Yansky, weight 114 pounds, lifted 149 pounds overhead with one hand. And right behind Louis is a postcard from Charlie Russell, Hercules, who beats Ripley by holding 9 quarts of milk in one hand and his sister Arlene in the other. I see here a letter from Charles that says, I'm enclosing one of my new stunt picture, which beats Ripley, who carried 11 cups of coffee in 2 hands at the same time, whose name is Mr. Hugo. In this photograph, it looks like Charles Russell not only is carrying 12 cups of coffee and his sister, he's doing it on ice skates. I should have used this in the ice skating episode. And behind the story about Charles, gotta love this, I have a handwritten letter from the great Rolandow, one of the great weightlifters of the turn of the century, and by that I mean the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, writing, Dear Mr. Hix, I'm sending you, under separate cover, a clipping of a finger lift, which will explain all there is to say. And at the bottom he writes, we all enjoy Strange As It Seems and their accuracy. I am cordially yours, Rolandow. Uncle John featured Rolandow several times in the early 1930s. Here he is turning a back somersault while holding 56-pound dumbbells in each hand. Here he is, husky and virile at 52, jumping over a table with a 75-pound weight in each hand. Amazing. Here's the comic strip proving he could jump back and forth over a 200-pound barbell while lifting it. And he could juggle a 250-pound weight on his feet. But the most amazing one in 1935, and the one that prompted the letter, here's Rolandow lifting 655 pounds with one finger. Now there's an interesting story here worth telling about the Rolandow dumbbell. Apparently, right at the turn of the century in 1896, Warren Lincoln Travis, another strongman, contracted with the McLaughlin Iron Foundry to create a dumbbell that weighed over 200 pounds. Travis used the bell in his strongman shows, but it never bore his name because he sold it to a man named Gottfried Wuthering, who was better known by his professional name, Rolandow. And as the story goes, Travis carried the weight several blocks to the nearest streetcar line. After an hour and 30 minutes later, he arrived at the trolley stop, toted the bell 2 more blocks, climbed 2 flights of stairs, up to Rolandow's office, and plopped the hunk of iron onto Rolandow's carpet, and non-politely asked to be paid. Rolandow indicated that unless he could hoist the dumbbell, there would be no sale. You can imagine what went through Warren's mind at the time. Anyway, Rolandow, who probably never weighed more than about 180 pounds, grasped the weight, cleaned it, and then bent pressed it for 7 reps. Then Rolandow handed Travis $2, according to David Webster, or $20, according to Strength and Health magazine. When Rolandow closed his gym in 1956, he sold the dumbbell to another strong man named Sigmund Klein, who at one point sold it as well, and unfortunately, the Rolandow dumbbell went missing. To this day, no one knows where it is, strange as it seems. And here, back in 1931, John Hix featured Warren Travis on his 50th birthday, who lifted 2 90-pound dumbbells overhead, tore a 1,440-page directory in half with his hands, lifted 348 pounds with his teeth, lifted 881¼ pounds with 2 fingers, and lifted 125,000 pounds on his back, all in 4 minutes. And 8 years later, in 1939, John Hix featured Warren Travis again at 63 years old, lifting over 1 million pounds, basically 1,000 pounds, 1,009 times with his back in 26.5 minutes. Here's a photograph of the contraption he used to do it, and this is amazing here. We have an affidavit in the state of New York, County of Kings, signed by Warren Lincoln Travis, and about 9 or 10 other witnesses who attested to the feat. What do leg day and sex have in common? When both are done right, you can't walk for days. And although I have yet to find the comic strip for this extraordinary story, I did find this poster of Captain Ringman Mach, Central American wonder athlete, absolutely the only act in the world that is impossible to duplicate. And rather painfully, we have Ringman Mach attaching massive amounts of weights to his nipples, which is extraordinary in and of itself. And we also have proof in a letter written in Spanish on one side, English on the other. And here we have a boxing program from 1929 showing Ringman Mach as the entertainment, looks like the headliner at the end of the evening. And the final piece of proof from Strength Magazine 1929, we learn how Captain Ringman Mach was able to perform such an extraordinary feat that could not be duplicated. As it turned out, he has lately returned to civilization after 20 years a prisoner among man-eating cannibals, Patagonia, South America. He states that no civilized white people had heretofore visited these barbarians. As we show in one of these illustrations, one of the pagan religious rites consisted of cutting slits in the breast of captives, after which they were suspended by ropes from trees, the only attachment being to the slitted wounds in the breasts. Yikes. And here we have the first of what would become many letters between Raymond Van Cleef, editor of Health and Strength, and Strange as It Seems, in which he says, "Dear Mr. Hix, for a number of years I've been a faithful reader and admirer of your column, Strange as It Seems. Not only did I find all of your novel facts and illustrations extremely interesting, but also very educational as well." In this letter, Ray includes a picture of himself hoisting a 112-pound anvil over his head 5 times, which John Hix published shortly thereafter. And every fact that Ray would send after that, he would include an affidavit, like this one about Kurt Saxon, famous weightlifter, and this one about Arthur Danderand, with the verification of the enclosed picture shows him at the conclusion of an exceptional feat of strength, with the engine resting entirely on one shoulder. And here's the photograph of Arthur Danderand, which John Hix used for his illustration on March 30th, 1932, along with another corroboration from Strength Magazine, Mark Berry, the editor there, who said, "Also enclosed is another picture of Danderand with a Ford Model T engine on his shoulder, having lifted it from the ground unassisted." And in 1934, John Hix featured the Anvil Man, Morris Bloom, who here we have a handwritten letter from Morris confirming that I am sending you a photo of myself. I was called the man with the iron head because I used to break rocks on my head. Each rock weighed 100 pounds using a sledgehammer that weighed 15 pounds. Ouch. And here's a photograph of the original Strong Bloom. I could take him. And here a letter from August 11th, 1933 from an S. Fisher, letting Uncle John know about Albert Renard from Oakland, who apparently could do, in 15 minutes, 210 perfect push-ups between two low-hanging chairs. Ordinarily, the average is 25. Mr. Fisher sent along with the letter a photograph of proof, and upon closer inspection, it looks like Albert Renard is naked. Does being naked make it more true? Who knows? But the fact was sufficiently proven to have John Hix publish it in October 8, 1933, although depicting Albert Renard rather more modestly wearing a pair of pants. Why did the fish stop lifting weights? He pulled a muscle. There were also several strange and unusual facts about weightlifting that stretch back even further in history. Here we have the strongman prohibition in the 14th century. Weight putting was outlawed by Edward III because it interfered with archery. Apparently it also interfered with football and golf, if I recall. And the ancient sport of caber tossing in Scotland, where a 20-foot tree was held upright and tossed as far as possible. Here's the early drawing of John Hix depicting this. Timber! And the famous strongman from the Victorian age, Angus MacAskill from Nova Scotia, who while he was in England was so famous that Queen Victoria expressed her desire to see him. The Queen was pleased with his visit and performance and asked if he leave a memento of his visit. Apparently not wishing to part with anything on his person, his Gaelic ingenuity came to the rescue, and his souvenir to Queen Victoria was some dozen deep dents in the polished hardwood floor, which he made by stomping around the room on his heels. MacAskill was 7 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 400 pounds when at his best. Another early strongman featured included G.N. Robinson, who pushed up a 100-pound weight to arm's length 20 times without stopping in 1785. And John Jackson, the English strongman and fighter who could write his name on a wall with an 84-pound weight tied to his little finger. And Lambert, the Boston strong boy who weighed 739 pounds, could lift 4 men at once and hold them at arm's length. Apparently this came from Hawkers and Walkers, a book or a magazine, I guess, written by Richardson Wright. Turns out this 739-pound man was married to an 89-pound woman. And apparently this old pic was from a print of like 1813, which John Hix used an early sketch to draw the picture. There's C.O. Breed, who in 1884 lifted with one hand a 219.5-pound barrel of flour, 240 times in 1 minute. This from the New York Clipper Almanac for 1886 and for 1900, page 114. And here we have an article by Sigmund Klein, the famed weightlifter, called Grip Champions of Old, in which he features Franz Fottinger, who at 59 could lift 28.5 pounds by grasping a needle between his fingers. And the famed old strongman Georges Levasseur, who lifted an elephant every day in 1907 at the Ringling Brothers Circus. And I found this newspaper clipping from the New York Times in 1928, just about when John Hix was really starting to collect tidbits of strange and unusual facts. And here's a really early one of a one-man holdup of the Quebec police force. Victor Delamare, who weighs 150 pounds, raises a platform on which 30 policemen are standing, each weighing an average of 200 pounds apiece. Stood while Chief Trudel, of course, umpired the feat. And there's Charles Clayton, the old-time American strongman, who supported a 10-piece band and 6 spectators on his chest. And for a Sunday comic in 1930, Eugene Cowett, Canadian strongman who weighed 425 pounds. And the ABBM Association notes by Mike Drummond, detailing all of the amazing feats during the balance of the active lifting season, winter and early spring, probably the most remarkable of which, Frank Olander of Brooklyn, who lifted 708 pounds with one finger. Here we have the John Hix scrapbook from 1936 featuring Frank Olander, and also the Human Bridge, Strongfort, supported a 1,500-pound steel bridge while an automotive crossed it. a total weight of 3.5 tons. And Harry Kloppenberg from Fordham University, lifting a 44-pound block weight from the floor with the fingers of one hand. And here's a photograph from Strength Magazine in December 29 of Kloppenberg lifting the huge Rolandow barbell at the studio of Sigmund Klein before it disappeared. And not all the stories were famous strongmen, like this one in the Los Angeles Examiner from August 31st, 1931. The man, William May Wright, who could tear a deck of cards into eights with his bare hands. And as the article says, many stage magicians and professional strongmen have tried to learn the trick from Wright, but none of them has succeeded, he said. Even Houdini couldn't do it. And here's Melvin Tamke from a Sunday comic in 1931 who could drive a 20-penny nail through 3 1-inch planks with his hand. Or W.C. Smith of Chichasha, Oklahoma, who could bend a 1/2-inch bolt into a U with his bare hands. Here's the article proving W.C. Smith's feat, which apparently he came to do because he ran away from his home in Chichasha when he was 13 years old because the boys were bullying him, apparently. And he resolved that he would return someday and become so strong that he'd be able to tear the biggest bully in two. Amazing. The kids down in Oklahoma always tease me. I received many a good licking. There was one bully who I dreaded so much I decided to go away, but to return one day and tear him in two. I began to watch my diet. I have not eaten a piece of candy, pie, cake, or pastry of any kind since I left home. It was just plain food for me. I never drank whiskey, coffee, or tea, but I drank large quantities of milk. And as the article concludes, Smith is now out of work. Someday he hopes to become a wrestler. I just quit my job at the gym because I wasn't big enough. I gave him my 2-week notice. Get it? 2 week. And not to be outdone, Cecil Burns, who carried a 120-pound bale of cotton 1,200 miles. Here's the article backing up Cecil Burns' feat. Apparently, Cecil Red Hot Burns had a new idea about training for football. He strapped a 120-pound bale of cotton on his back in Dallas, Texas, and walked all the way to Chicago. It took the 23-year-old professional footballer 3 months to finish the 1,200-mile hike. His manager went along in an automobile to see, as he said, that Burns walked every step of the way. Here's Robert Nodal from Hagerstown, Maryland, who could chin himself on a rope with one hand, holding a 20-pound weight in the other, and Ed Goodman from San Diego, California, who walked 15 feet up a tree, carrying a 75-pound weight on each arm, who, among other feats, could walk up a tree for 15 feet carrying a 75-pound kettlebell in the crook of each arm. John Hix writes him back and says, "Thanks for the suggestion. You spoke of sending credentials and pictures." And apparently Edward Goodman, who's not only an attorney at law in San Diego, sent lots of pictures of himself doing such incredible feats, along with, inasmuch as it's not feasible to send you one of the many medals I have won, I enclose herewith a penciled facsimile thereof. How's that? A penciled facsimile, decades before the fax machine. I can't believe I forgot to go to the gym today. It's like 7 years in a row now. And this letter from A. Lee on February 23rd, 1931. Here's one I thought would interest you. Lee Traver raised his brother Ed on his heels while singing a song, with as much ease as though he were unhampered by his brother's weight. Lee weighed 180, and Ed weighed 162, and sure enough, on April 21st, 1931, John Hix featured Lee Traver, raising his 162-pound brother off the floor with his heels, singing a song. And there's She-Cat, the wrestler who can lift 700 pounds in this manner, proven by this October 18th, 31 article in Rocky Mountain News, back of which has a picture of a man that looks strikingly like Shane Gillis. Wonder if he's a time traveler. And Kurt Saxon, who could lift 982 pounds in this manner. 330 with the legs, 88 with each foot, 200 on the abdomen, and 100 on the arms, with 88 in each hand. Crazy. And Joe Price, the English blacksmith, who uses a 50-pound maul like an ordinary hammer. John Davis, only 181 pounds, who chinned himself while holding a 20-pound weight. And Nels Hall from Philadelphia, who can do a handstand with one finger in a bottle. And here's the amazing John Y. Smith, who was the strongman champion of New England at the age of 60 in 1926. This was in 1932. And later on in that year, on May 6th, John Hix featured that John Y. Smith set the world's lifting record at the age of 60, 400 pounds, one-hand deadlift. And in here is a letter to a Mr. Evans who apparently wrote in and challenged John Hix on his facts and said the information you requested is below. John Smith was born aboard an Austrian ship in Chinese waters of German mother and Scotch father, April 22, 1866. At the age of 60, in 1926, he won the title of the strongest man in New England. Now 65 years old, he is the superior of all middleweights throughout the world at the strength feats at which he excels. To secure his present address to write for proof, I would suggest that you write to Strongman Magazine, published by Milo Publishing Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And here he is again, many years later in 1942. John Y. Smith, famed old-time strongman at 75, could press 175 pounds. You know why the weightlifter went to therapy. You wanted to get something off his chest. There's more than a few of these super agers featured over the years, like George Elliott Flint from Long Beach, who pushed up two 80-pound dumbbells 13 consecutive times at the age of 61, then pushed up two 70-pound dumbbells 15 consecutive times 4 years later. Here's the letter from George Elliott Flint, or a couple of letters from him. I'll state as briefly as possible, although it's about a 3-page letter. But the extraordinary feature is that at the age of 62, I almost doubled the record I made when I was in my supposed prime. That fact alone should interest physicians and scientists. I performed the feats as I have described before witnesses who signed affidavits, and sure enough, we have quite a few affidavits from George Elliott Flint, including Gertrude Flint, which is probably his wife. And even more amazing, Oliver Chalker, England's age strongman who wheeled a 672-pound load when he was 90 years old. My favorite exercise is a cross between a lunge and a crunch. I call it lunch. And in February of 1935, John Hix featured Loren Ricketts of Alliance, Nebraska, who could carry a 120-pound sack of potatoes up a flight of steps and swing it onto a truck with his teeth. And for proof, we have a letter. Dear sir, Mr. Loren Ricketts of Alliance, Nebraska can carry a 120-pound sack of potatoes out of the cellar, up the steps, and throw them in a truck all by his teeth, his hands crossed on his back. If this article is of any use to you, you have his and my consent to have it in the paper. I'm his mother, and will remain, very sincerely, Mrs. Frank Gillespie. As all of us remember from grade school, there's no better form of proof than a letter from your mother. I mean, weightlifting is a tough sport. I mean, there's a lot of others that have set the bar really high. And in the Boston Post, January 15th, 1933, John Hix came across Marino's son, or the man with the iron ribs. He's one of Germany's strongest men and is always disposed to give everyone a lift. And as we can see by the letter, at a mere youth of 17, George Simons won the title of the strongest as well as the most perfect youth. How about that? Here's a little headliner of George Simons, America's strongest and most perfect youth, who performed that and many other feats on the stage of the Pantages Theater in 1929. Apparently carrying guys riding a bicycle was a thing in those days. Here's George Simons, the 19-year-old strongman carrying 3 men on a bicycle for a whole city block, just one arm. And here on May 30th, 1932, John Hix is featuring Joe Nordquist, who lifted 388 pounds with his arms, shoulder bridge position, which might not seem that incredible until you realize 9 years later, he publishes Joe Nordquist lost his left leg as a child, yet still became a world's champion strongman and still holds the record of pressing 388 pounds. And I love this one. Norman Purdue, carrying his 125-pound wife, walked to the top floor of a 47-story building in 22 minutes. This is another affidavit from Ray Van Cleef. Norman Purdue is a leading vaudeville acrobatic strongman performer. The enclosed picture shows him performing this feat of endurance with his wife. Purdue is a sincere advocate of the importance of milk in diet. He demonstrates the value of milk as a food by performing these remarkable tests of endurance and strength after having been on a strict milk diet for a number of days. And here's an extraordinary story that John Hix ran across in Strength magazine of April 1931 about H.E. Man, or He-Man, who carried a bull every day. Apparently, based on some of these newspaper articles, Somebody once told the HE man that if you take some animal when it's very young and small and lift it off its feet every day and keep doing it while the animal grows toward maturity, you'll be able to pick the animal up when it's fully grown. So he figured he'd try it. Here's HE man lifting his 600-pound bull in 1931, which is extraordinary in and of itself, until you realize 18 years later, HE man writes a handwritten letter here and says, "Sir, you've drawn a cartoon of me carrying a 600-pound bull several times. The latter is all right, but the 600-pound understatement burns me up. Let's get it straight. The bull weighs 840 pounds the last time I carried him, and as proof he sent a picture of him with a 715-pound bull along with a 107-pound girl, lifting them both." I love this. Here's a letter in here. The article about HE man, looks like it comes from a Warren Thompson. The article about HE man doing that tremendous amount of lifting is doubtful. Clarification on that matter would be very much appreciated. And here from November 1949, "Dear Mr. Thompson, your letter of October 31st has just reached me. Mr. HE man of 2370 Arlington Avenue," gave the address as proof, "advised me that he carried the bull and the girl for enough for a camera to make a newsreel. Perhaps you'd like to write Mr. Mann for further information. I was very glad to hear from you." And then he has the article to HE man. "I thought you might be interested in the enclosed card. Put him in touch to give the proof." And as the 1930s was wrapping up, we had Mike Mangioli, who carried a 100-pound sack of sugar 8 miles without stopping or setting down his load. And here we have Tony Terlazzo, who actually was the first American to win weightlifting gold in 1936. Here he is in 1938, cleaning and jerking 319 pounds, more than twice his own weight. And here in this magazine article, a step-by-step clean and jerk of 319 pounds, doing an exercise known as the two-hand snatch. I was at the gym and somebody asked me if I could do some cardio, and I said, yeah, I'm still weighing my options. And here in November of 1939, just at the end of the decade, we have the world's strongest right arm, which was Demetrius Tofalos, the Greek strongman who became a champion weightlifter and wrestler, who apparently his right arm was so badly injured as a child that doctors wanted to amputate it. Now it's 2.5 inches shorter than the left, but he's still one of the greatest, strongest weightlifters in the world. And the final item in this folder from the 1930s in the wonderful world of weightlifting, have one of the more poignant letters I've found in the Strange As It Seems archives. This one from Rasmus Nielsen, who at 65 years old appeared with Strange As It Seems at the 1939 World's Fair in New York City. In this letter, Rasmus writes, "Well, Mr. Hix, I'm going to ask a favor of you, and I would certainly be grateful if you would grant it. I wish you will feature this picture in your Strange As It Seems cartoon, for in 37 and 38, I was turned down when applying for work up in my hometown of Angels Camp on account of my age. I can't think of no better way of getting back at them than through your Strange As It Seems cartoon." Unfortunately, I don't see a cartoon here, but in 1939, it was an extraordinary year for Strange As It Seems. That was the year that John Hix scooped Ripley for a spot in the 1939 World's Fair. And Ripley didn't take it too well. And 2 blocks away, he opened his first Ripley's Odditorium to compete with John Hix in Strange As It Seems at the 39 New York World's Fair. And that became the first of many auditoriums which Ripley opened up around the world, including here in Hollywood, California, where John Hix lived, as did his brother, my grandfather Ernest, and my grandmother Elsie, where my father was born. My father went to Hollywood High, and where the Strange As It Seems feature ran for 40 years. Well, that does it for this episode as we close the folder in the 1930s wild world of weightlifting. If you like this kind of content, please like, follow, and share below. And join me next time when I open up the folders on the 1940s world of weightlifting, as well as children and women weightlifters. See you next time here at Strange As It Seems.